Resuming debate, the honourable member for Fundy Royal.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The motion that we're debating today is pretty simple, but the effects it's having on Canadians from coast to coast is profound. The motion says that the House has no confidence in the Prime Minister and the government. And, Madam Speaker, that's not just what we're saying here as a Conservative caucus, that we don't have confidence in the Prime Minister. That's what I'm hearing in my riding of Fundy Royal, where people now are hurting in ways that they were not hurting before this Prime Minister came along. Under this Liberal government over the last 9 years, we've seen some absolutely astronomical increases in the misery that Canadians are facing. And I want to just speak to a few of those. These are the facts, Madam Speaker, and Canadians are aware of these facts. In spite of what the Prime Minister will say to try to change the channel, Canadians are smart and they're attuned to what's happening around them. And they know that this government's policies are hurting them and hurting their ability to put food on their table, to pay their mortgage, to pay their rent, and to keep their house heated, to put gas in their vehicle. Everyday Canadians are aware of the impact of this government's reckless actions. So just a few of them, Madam Speaker. Under this government, in 9 years only, they have doubled the debt of this country. They have doubled housing costs. Mortgage payments are double. Rent payments are double. They've caused the worst inflation, Madam Speaker, in 40 years. They have sent 2 million people to the food bank. You know, food bank usage has risen every year for the last 9 years. And that is every year that this government has been in power. Every year they've added to the misery facing Canadians. I know from coast to coast, we used to look at parts of Vancouver and see the tent cities that have risen up there, and we used to see that as something that was unique to that area. But now, whether you're in St. John, New Brunswick, or Moncton, or Fredericton, or Halifax, anywhere from coast to coast, Madam Speaker, we're seeing tent cities. We're seeing an increase in the misery that Canadians are facing. Canadians have been forced to pay more for gas, groceries, and home heating thanks to this completely out-of-touch Liberal carbon tax. Think about it, Madam Speaker. At a time when people are struggling and having to make choices between heating their home, putting food on the table, filling their cars so they can get to work, heaven forbid if their kids are playing hockey or into other sports and they have to transport them in their vehicle, Canadians are stretched to the limit. But what does this government do? What does this Prime Minister do? It says, no, Canadians aren't paying enough. You know, even though the carbon tax is hitting people at 20 cents a litre, that has to go up. That has to go up eventually to 61 cents per litre increase. In April alone, the Prime Minister increased the carbon tax by 23%. As part of his plan to quadruple the tax to 61 cents per litre by 2030. And Madam Speaker, I'm going to read this. According to the Fraser Institute, this will end up costing average Canadian worker $6,700 per year and result in 164,000 fewer jobs. And, you know, the constituents that I'm talking to, their views are being reflected across the country in the by-election results that we've seen this Prime Minister. 3 by-elections in a row, he's lost. But the conclusion the Prime Minister comes to is it's not that he's wrong, it's that Canadians are wrong. And that's always his default, because he believes that he knows best and he's always right, and everything that we're facing is somebody else's fault. Well, Madam Speaker, after 9 years, the blame for the situation that we're facing now as Canadians has to be laid squarely at the feet of this Liberal government and this Liberal Prime Minister. And, you know, this isn't some accident. You know, the Prime Minister will often say, well, there's global trends and so on. Madam Speaker, the misery that we're seeing, the crime, for example, that we're seeing, the increase in crime has to be directly blamed on the deliberate actions of this government. Bill C-75 that was introduced and passed by this government that created a revolving door, that the default is an offender will get bail. Bail means the person is back out on the street after committing a serious offense. And what we're hearing from experts, from police officers, from community leaders, is that the revolving door of repeat and oftentimes violent offenders is leading to tragic results. It's not that there's lots and lots of Canadians involved in crime. There's a few number of Canadians that should be in jail that are committing a lot of crime. And Madam Speaker, Statistics Canada, you don't have to take my word for it. Let's look at what Statistics Canada says about just how out of control violent crime has become since only 2015. That's the year that the Liberals took power. And I think you'll agree with me, Madam Speaker, the numbers are absolutely staggering and are an indictment on the entire approach, the entire soft on crime, revolving door, catch and release system that these Liberals have created. And Madam Speaker, you'll notice I don't call it a justice system. It's a system because there is no justice for victims in this system. And I was very moved at Justice Committee when we had a witness, a victim of crime, who said she doesn't call it a justice system because she did not see the justice for her and her family in the system. So those statistics from Statistics Canada, Madam Speaker, auto theft is up 46%. Violent crime is up 50%. Sexual assaults are up 75%. Homicides are up 28%. Human trafficking, 83%. Crimes against children, Madam Speaker, are up over 100%. They're up 118%. Gang-related murders have doubled. Extortion is up 357%. Violent gun crimes. You know, the Prime Minister talks a good game about gun crimes, but all we've seen now, $67 million spent on a gun confiscation scheme that has not collected one firearm. So for all his talk about firearms crime, what is the result of this Prime Minister? Violent gun crime has gone up 116%. In fact, Madam Speaker, violent gun crime has gone up every year since this Prime Minister took office. So these are deliberate actions, Madam Speaker. Bill C-5, another terrible bill by this government, eliminated mandatory penalties related to gun crimes like robbery with a firearm, extortion with a firearm, weapons trafficking, possession of a firearm obtained illegally, using a firearm in the commission of an offense. What else did Bill C-5 do? Eliminated mandatory prison time for drug dealers, those that were convicted of trafficking or possession for the purpose of trafficking, importing and exporting serious drugs, production of a substance Schedule I, that's heroin, cocaine, fentanyl, crystal meth. All of these now are eligible for house arrest. Madam Speaker, can you not see how a government that would bring in a piece of legislation like this that allows for house arrest where before it was prohibited, house arrest for sexual assault, kidnapping, trafficking in persons, motor vehicle theft, abduction of a person under 14, assault causing bodily harm or with a weapon? Prior to this government coming along, all of those offenses I have just listed would have meant the offender would serve their time out of the community, in jail, where they belong, so the community would be safe while this repeat offender was in jail. Instead, under this government, these individuals are back on the street and committing the same crime over and over again. And Madam Speaker, I heard one of the Liberal members mention their so-called safe supply. Just today in the newspaper, the police raid at a heavily used harm reduction site in Nanaimo resulted in an individual, this is a so-called legal safe supply, an individual charged with 14 counts of possession for the purpose of trafficking and 8 weapons offenses, another charged with 6 possession for the purpose of trafficking and 5 weapons offenses. As Conservatives have been saying, that this so-called safe supply is getting into our streets and harming our young people. It's time for the Prime Minister to face reality. It's time to call a carbon tax election so that common sense Conservatives can axe the tax, build the homes, fix the budget, and stop the crime. Thank you, Madam.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, Madam Speaker, the member opposite, like all Conservative members, they sure do have those slogans down packed. I'll give them that much. You know, I believe that they likely already have the bumper stickers printed to match the slogans, in fact, Madam Speaker. The question I have for my friends across the way, in that thirst and hunger for power, have they given any thought in regards to why not working for Canadians today until the next election happens to come? Why not look at the issues that Canadians are facing today and start being a little bit more proactive in allowing legislation, for example, to advance to the committee stage? Even legislation they support, Madam Speaker. They are so focused on the Conservative Party and their leader, they've lost their focus on Canadians. The question is, why?
Honourable Member for Fundy Royal.
Madam Speaker, the honourable member can't be real. We come here, Conservative members of Parliament come here every day and fight for a better Canada, fight for their constituents. And what our constituents are telling us, Madam Speaker, they can't afford any more years of this government. They can't afford skyrocketing crime. They can't afford groceries or heat or their mortgage or their rent or to put food on the table. Madam Speaker, the worst inflation in 40 years, 2 million people attending at food banks. Madam Speaker, Canadians can't afford another second of this Liberal government.
Questions et commentaires. L'honorable.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Beaupré, Court d'Orléans, Beauport, Côte-Beaupré, Orléans-Charlevoix. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for their speech, which reminds us how difficult the situation is for many people in Quebec and elsewhere in Canada. And I'd like to have my colleague's opinion if there were a Conservative government, which they're expecting with great hope. I'd like to know if they would be open to reviewing healthcare transfers that are given to the provinces, particularly to Quebec. We know that Quebec racked up $11 billion deficit, including $6 billion from the fact that the federal government probably didn't pay the healthcare transfers. So I'd like to know if a Conservative government would be more open to taking on its federal responsibility, i.e. paying adequate healthcare transfers to provinces.
Royal.
Madam Speaker, I thank the honourable member for her question. A new Conservative government is going to be focused on improving the livelihoods and the lives of all Canadians. We have to end this government's misuse of taxpayers' dollars, this waste that we see. When we have waste in the system, when we have scandal in the system, there is less money to go around for the services that we so cherish as Canadians. So this is why we're going to stop the crime. We're going to fix the budget, build homes. We're going to axe the carbon tax. We're going to axe the carbon tax so Canadians can afford to live again. That's the focus. That's what we're talking about. And that's the focus of a new government that's going to be there for Canadians.
The honourable member for Port Moody, Coquitlam.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And again, today in committee, the corporate coalition of the Liberals and the Conservatives teamed up to make sure that the contract flipping was not addressed in committee today. The week before, they teamed up to make sure that Canada's largest corporate landlords didn't have to come to committee to be accountable to Canadians.
Wow.
We know that the Conservatives continue, just like the Liberals, to wine and dine the corporate elites in Canada for fundraising purposes. So my question to the member is, why do the Conservatives to continue to support the Liberals to protect their corporate landlords in committee?
Member for Fundy Royal.
I think the honourable member is missing the point of the debate today. Conservative Party is calling for non-confidence in this House, that this House does not have the confidence in the Prime Minister or in the government. Everything about this government is wrong because it's not putting the people of Canada first. It's selfishly and with much greed, taking more than they should, taking too much from taxes, making it too difficult for Canadian families to make ends meet, to punish good things like going to work, raising a family, driving your kids to sports. All of that is punished in Justin Trudeau's Canada, and that's going to change under a Conservative government.
Mention members' names in the House. Can I remind the honourable member that we do not use members' names in the House?